everybody. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 4th of June, 2025. First things first, today for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a white button-down shirt. Sorry, I had to adjust the collar. I have pink skin, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. My hair is pulled back today. I'm in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart, and I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay, you put two narcissists in a room together. It's never going to end well. And I think that's probably the understatement of the year. I think anybody who saw the Elon Musk and Donald Trump alignment during the final days of the 2024 campaign knew that at some point we would kind of arrive at this place. But after that crazy press conference last week where Elon was very clearly high and showed up with a black eye and Trump was pink-eyed and ranting, and they simultaneously managed to praise each other. Yesterday, Elon Musk went on to his propaganda platform and called Trump's big, beautiful budget bill, as he has taken to calling it, a disgusting abomination. Now, there's a lot of speculation about why. Why did Elon do this? Why now? What's the motivation behind this particular action? And I have to say that I think at least some of this is coming from the fact that Elon knows that he has taken an enormous blow to his reputation and his wealth as a result of his association with Trump. And this may be some way of him trying to claw back a little bit of his reputation. The problem, of course, with malignant narcissists is that once the veil is off, they kind of can't put it back on, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, they find new victims every minute of every day, but simultaneously, this one is really hard to recover from. And there are rumors now that, Republican Congress people are being warned that if they vote for the bill, Elon's going to back their Democratic candidate. I will just say, in addition to being a narcissist, Elon is very much someone who exploits whatever he can for his own advantage. And so it wouldn't be shocking to see him come out and make a donation to a Democratic candidate. He has historically donated to Democratic candidates in the past. I will also just note, though, that this comes on the heels of him saying a few weeks ago that he was going to very drastically roll back his political donations. So I will just say that I think that like any other narcissist, when he's caught in the line of fire, he tries to project and take attention off of himself and put it onto other people, or simultaneously make himself out to be a hero. Here, I'm just going to point out again, Elon Musk's work at Doge has killed at least 300,000 people so far. This man gets no quarter from me, and he shouldn't get it from anyone. And he knows he's in deep water right now because Tesla takedown has been wildly effective. Tesla stock price has been wildly up and down. The resale market for Tesla in Europe is down 90%. So unless and until he manages to try to recover in some way, shape, or form, all the damage that he's done to himself and his businesses, that downslide will continue. And I just have to say that if Twitter is any kind of lesson in all of this, he doesn't have a stop button or an off button. So I'm not expecting any of this to kind of recover anytime soon. What I will point out that is sort of interesting to watch is that this comment by Elon has given some folks inside the GOP, not people that I'm at all fans of, because I'm not a fan of any of them, but an opening to talk about what this is going to do to the federal deficit. And so Rand Paul was out yesterday on the news talking about how Elon was right. And I have to say that given that, this budget, both, in terms of reconciliation and in terms of the fact that there's going to have to be revotes, is going to require everybody to line up, essentially, with maybe one or two exceptions. Well, I guess it would take 3 or 4 exceptions in the Senate, depending on who's present. And a couple of votes in the House in order to become law. So this is not something that that necessarily I think deserves much credence beyond the fact that it is creating openings for the GOP to members of the GOP who are a little nervous about this to raise concerns. And that's not a bad thing. I will point out that we have breaking news this morning, speaking of the federal budget bill, that folks should be aware of. So the Congressional Budget Office, which is supposed to be essentially like a nonpartisan evaluator of how the budget would impact the economy, among other things, announced this morning I'm sorry. You guys know this. Some days I laugh because the outcome is so disgusting that it's like a coping mechanism. Today is one of those days. The CBO announced that Trump's budget will add $2.4 trillion to the federal deficit, all for the sake of giving the rich tax cuts and kicking everyone who is in desperate need off of any aspect of the social safety net, essentially. Cutting 13 million people off of Medicaid, decimating SNAP benefits, right? Ripping away provisions inside the ACA, and that's leaving aside the other things that it does. So this particular stat is also likely to raise some concern among more like traditional members of the GOP. And then there's one other thing that's been happening in the last 24 hours, which I know for a lot of like lay people who, I'm going to remind you all, I went to law school in Washington, D.C. I lived there for a total of 9 years and did a fair amount of kind of collaborative work with people on the Hill at the time. And I will say that this thing that has happened in the last 24 hours of people who actually voted for the budget bill in the House, including people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, coming out and saying, oh, I didn't know that was in the bill, I didn't have time to read it, is not an ancient thing, okay? So people need to understand the way that this used to work was that when a bill was introduced, people had time to read it. And staffers on the Hill were actually charged with reading the bill and writing summaries that would then be given to senators and representatives. Sometimes those folks would actually read the bills themselves if they weren't like 900 pages long. But this thing of like, we're shoving this bill through Congress, we're introducing it, we're voting on it the same day, or we're voting on it the next day, is not the way things historically have been supposed to work. So yesterday, Marjorie Taylor Greene came out and said, I had no idea that there was language in this bill that said we could never regulate AI. And if I had known that, I wouldn't have voted for it. And if it comes back around to the House in reconciliation in that form, I won't be voting for it then. And there have been numerous instances of this now with regard to the budget bill, where a variety of folks in the House have said, I didn't know that was in there, I'm not voting for it next time. So the future of this bill is very much in question right now, even though it has passed the House, right? And so we have to wait and see what the next stages are here in terms of how this develops. But yeah, lots of reasons to be deeply concerned about the budget bill this morning. And, I don't ordinarily agree with Elon, and I don't agree with him on the rationale for this, I suppose, because while it will add a lot to the budget deficit, what I'm much more concerned about is like eliminating all health care for trans people on Medicaid, right? Eliminating SNAP benefits to the point where families will have a $250 per month food bill. That's how much we spend on food in my household of 3 every week for groceries. That's like the basement level of what we spend. So, this is a situation where it is a disgusting abomination, and mostly because what it does is make drastic cuts to services and funding that really desperate people need to benefit the uber wealthy in our society. So it's wildly amoral. Okay, so today, Trump's 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum have gone into effect. So it's a tariff day, not a no tariff day. I know this has become kind of like a running joke now. Those of you who were around in the old days on Twitter know about the dog where it was a bones day or a no bones day. And that poor puppy is unfortunately long gone. But that was one of the fun things during Trump 1 era, was whether it was a bones day where like you could actually stand and get out of bed and do your work, or if it was a no bones day where you just wanted to collapse and hide under the covers. Yes. Today is a tariff day. And so we're seeing lots of discussions, including from EU officials, about the fact that these tariffs never should have gone into effect, about how this is adversely impacting trade negotiations that were already underway. The U.S. Trade Representative is supposed to be talking to officials in the EU, and folks in the EU are kind of like, what are you doing here? And of course, Trump's out there talking about all these tariffs and, people inside the culture cheering. I will just say, I don't think that, as with everything else, that this is going to last terribly long. I know we have this meme now about President Taco. Trump always chickens out. I'm just going to say, I feel like the Democratic messaging on this has gotten really weak. Nobody needs Taco Tuesday on the Hill. That we have much bigger, more significant things to talk about. And it's really hard, by the way, to talk about Trump as a fascist and simultaneously as totally incompetent in the same breath, and have that be an effective messaging strategy. But all that said, the taco thing is real, that nickname was attached for a reason. And I don't expect that, the tariffs are going to last terribly long. Okay. So we have to talk about what happened with ICE yesterday in Minneapolis. For those who missed it, and I talked yesterday, you can go back and watch the broadcast from yesterday if you missed me talking about this then. But, we've had this situation now where ICE goes into neighborhoods, drops into a restaurant or a local eatery or shop, and arrests people on the spot and drags them out of their community. And what's been happening in San Diego and Massachusetts, small town Massachusetts, and then yesterday in Minneapolis, is that there are spontaneous protests and resistance popping up from local citizens. And these have gotten more and more loud, pushy than they have been historically. We talked yesterday about the fact that ICE was literally chanted out of a town in Massachusetts a couple of days ago with like, F you, get out of our effing town, that kind of thing. We're forced to back up and get in their trucks and drive away. So yesterday, a similar onslaught happened in Minneapolis. This time, ICE arrived with a broad swath of other law enforcement, including folks from DHS, of course, of which ICE is a branch, the FBI, and other law enforcement agencies. Now, there's also a dispute about whether or not the MPD, which of course was supposed to be undergoing reforms. I'm going to remind you, you can't reform the police, but that's a conversation for another time. After George Floyd's murder, and there are debates going on about whether the MPD was there just to try to maintain safety or whether they were there actually assisting ICE. That's a whole conversation that's happening on social media right now, and I'm sure there's going to be more coming out about it. But, the MPD did issue a statement saying they weren't there assisting ICE. They were just there after protests broke out. However, the situation got very heated. And there were, the folks who showed up for ICE and law enforcement were in full riot gear, right? It was wacky, not just machine guns, but also with helmets and goggles and the whole 9 yards and their camo and their mask coverings. And local Minneapolis residents weren't having it. And so there is footage of, local Minneapolis citizens getting up in the face of these people and saying, get out, and then being shoved and pushed away really violently. In addition to the fact that, it's very clear that the law enforcement folks and ICE showed up for battle. So this morning on the Patreon feed, I was asked a question about isn't this going to end in bloodshed? Well, it's quite possible it will at some point. And, I don't think that's a reason to stop standing up. One of the things, as I said yesterday, that we do have to take some I don't want to say hope in, but that we need to see as an optimistic sign is that ICE is so despised right now when they descend on a neighborhood like this and snatch people from their places of work or worship or jobs or schools, that local people on a moment's notice are showing up to defend where they live and to defend the people who live there. And that in and of itself is a sign of where we stand as a country. And I have to say that, I think given, polling, I said this yesterday, you all know how I feel about it, but there's a massive majority. We're talking close to 70% now in the polling of folks who really don't agree with what Trump is doing with ICE. And so it may, Kent State ended in bloodshed also, I have to point out, right? There's no way to predict when that could happen. Do I think it's possible? Yes. I think that ICE and the various law enforcement folks who are involved are in over their heads. The fact that they had to use flash bombs and tear gas in San Diego a couple of days ago was a sign of how far in over their heads they are. And I also have to point out that one of the things that's very distressing about this particular situation is that we don't know who any of these officers are. There have been some photographs recently, especially in the immigration raids that were conducted in the New York City courthouse a couple of days ago, where, folks have Nazi and far right-wing white supremacist tattoos while they're in law enforcement gear. And there are really serious questions about who these people are, especially the plainclothes officers that are showing up to kidnap people. So none of this is a recipe for peace, right? But what I will say is that the more pushback that there is, the better it is likely to become in the context of the pressure that is being put on the Trump administration to stop this. And, we have Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller out there saying they want 3,000 people deported or arrested and detained and then deported a day right now. Doesn't matter whether or not they're like here on asylum, they're here on protected status, whether they have pending immigration claims, whether or not they're on a path to citizenship. They don't care. And, you know, what's happened in Missouri, yesterday I said Iowa by mistake, but what happened in Missouri that was the subject of that big piece inside the New York Times is an indicator of what the experiences are like right now in towns all over America where this kind of stuff is happening. So there really needs to be a two-sided evaluation of this, right? Yes, what ICE is doing is horrific. Also, they are in over their heads. They don't know what to do when citizens where they show up are objecting loudly with, you know, physical protest, putting their bodies between ICE and the people they're after. They don't know what to do with that. There is a sense, by the way, when you watch some of these videos, these people are not well trained. They're not prepared for that kind of pushback. In fact, you can kind of see, especially in the footage of them like backing away, that there's a kind of like, holy crap, we didn't expect this sort of response going on. And some of that probably has to do with the fact that, you know, they've been told that they're in the right and they're stopping an invasion and all this other propaganda that is out there right now from the far right wing and Trump and Miller. So, you know, I can't sit here and tell you that it's not going to end badly at some point. And also simultaneously, I think the same kinds of resistance that we're seeing are critical to stopping what is essentially like a fascist roundup of brown people in this country without any regard for the law. And so, you know, it's very important to be brave in this era and to do your part to stand up for humanity. And no civil rights victories and human rights victories in history have been won by staying at home behind a computer screen. That doesn't mean like stealth activism doesn't work. More on that in a minute. But it does mean that if you have the capacity to show up and the drive to show up, you should do it. Okay. One other thing I wanted to talk about today, because somebody asked me about this also, was the issue of Democratic strategists and think tanks. Okay, so this morning, or it might have been late yesterday, Adam Gentleson, who used to be I think he was actually the chair of John Fetterman's campaign, and then he quit after all this stuff about Fetterman came out, and apparently Fetterman started acting really irrationally. So he announced, I guess late yesterday, that he, in conjunction with some folks, I guess like under the sponsorship or the rubric or with the support of the DNC, are starting a new think tank to try to move the DNC to opinions that are broadly supported, whether those opinions are traditionally Democratic values or not. And I'm not the only one who kind of lost it at this a little bit this morning on Blue Sky. I'm far from it. Lots of, you know, left-leaning commentators were like, WTF. Because, you know, one of the things that I think has rightly been pointed out by others is that think tanks have never really saved democracy, right? They're not places where you find huge pockets of resistance or like civil rights defenders or the like. You know, even the Brookings Institute, which is kind of a left-leaning think tank, has a lot of problems attached to it in terms of like some of the opinions that they've issued. I have a friend who used to work there. I'll save that story for another time. But one of the things that I want people to be aware of here is that there is nothing to be gained in trying to recruit conservative voters who are never going to vote for us anyway. There is especially nothing to be gained by throwing trans people and immigrants under the bus in an attempt to get those votes. And in fact, what we're seeing in lots of places around the globe and at home is that when Democratic candidates and left-leaning candidates stand up for what's right, they get much more support than people who are kind of like hovering around the middle, wishy-washy, like maybe I don't support trans people. Maybe it's okay to deport millions of brown people regardless of due process. Those are not opinions that, generally speaking, are effective. And in fact, what they're likely to do is cause the base of the Democratic Party to bleed support. So one of the things that I just want people to think about here, and to think about it like really seriously, is that the people right now who are turning out tens of thousands of people for rallies on our side of the fence are people like AOC and Bernie, right? The people who are fighting back and actually gaining ground against centrist Democrats are people like Mamdani, like Zoran Mamdani, who is right now pretty much neck and neck with Andrew Cuomo for the top of the Democratic Party ticket in New York City. He is wildly progressive. He wants to freeze rent in New York City. And he's up against like an old school sexual harasser. By the way, if you live in New York City, please don't rank Cuomo or Adams. Just don't rank them at all. It's a ranked choice ballot. Don't rank them. Because if you rank them, there's a possibility that they could still be elected. Don't rank them at all. So, we're seeing a real shift here in the way in which, philosophies around this stuff are playing out. And I just have to say that I continue as a lifelong Democrat to be wildly disappointed in members of the Democratic Party who think it's okay to sacrifice anybody for the sake of getting a handful of white voters to vote Democrat. Like, that's not principled, and it's not ethical, and it's not moral. So when I was talking about this morning on Blue Sky and, reposting a lot of people who were saying similar things to what I was saying, like, why is it the Democratic think tanks don't ever like endorse, removing tax protections for churches or, making sure, for instance, that like, we've got, 10% tax on billionaires on top of what everybody else is taxed. Why don't we ever hear that? And, those points are all very valid. So, it's really critical right now to understand that the positions that are going to be winning positions are the ones that are positions of principle. And we should be supporting and backing people who are taking principled, ethical, moral positions to fight back against this administration and ignoring the people who say that we have to throw people under the bus to get a few more white conservative votes. Okay. I feel really strongly about this. And, obviously, I think we've got to, stand up for what's right. Like, this shouldn't be that hard, right? It shouldn't be that hard. It's amoral to deport anyone without due process rights. It's amoral to go into towns and round up people who have children here, who have lived here for 20 years, who are working and, contributing to their communities. And it just makes no sense to me. I mean, I have very strong opinions about borders. Again, I keep alluding to this, but I find all of this just to be nonsense, right? Like, how can you possibly be a colonialist conqueror and then claim that, like it's your land? Doesn't make any sense. But in any event, it's amoral to throw trans people under the bus. Like, let people be free and safe and be who they are. There's nothing hard about this. Nothing hard about it. And I also have to say, like, the trans women in sports thing that has been held up as like, an issue that, like feminist women can get behind, banning trans women from sports. Wrong. I mean, like, again, I have to point out that like the kids are good. There are instances in like college track and field about this in the last week where like a trans athlete who performed incredibly well was on the podium with cis girls and women, all of whom were like arm in arm supporting one another. This is all bullshit that is being drummed up to create controversy by the far right, and Democratic strategists are falling for it hook, line, and sinker. And that's not how we move ahead. That's not how we move ahead. Amoral is a word. A-M-O-R-A-L. Just in case you were wondering. It means without any morals, as opposed to against morals. Okay, anyway. Point being that we should all be very wary of anybody who claims that we have to throw people under the bus to get ahead. We don't. And in fact, the way that we win is by standing up for something better and standing up like on principle for something better and fighting for it. So that is my little rant for today. Sometimes you guys like them, sometimes you don't. That's okay. All right, quick announcement. We have a free webinar coming up a week from Monday on stealth activism. Why are we doing this? Because the video that I did last week is our standalone educational video here on the channel. I will be sure to link it above, is viral. And it has like, I don't know, 121,000 views now. And so the team and I were talking and, clearly we hit a nerve with this one. So we're going to offer a free webinar on how you can use stealth activism where you live and in your own work to make a difference without kind of like putting people in jeopardy. Or if you live in a place where you don't feel safe doing that kind of work, to still do work that moves the needle, because doing nothing is not an option. One of the things I always have to say about this is like, white folks get too scared. about this in many instances. People with privilege tend to get like a little too scared about this. You can still make a difference even if you are a blue dot in a red state. And we're going to talk about how to do all of that and how to make a difference and why we have to have a multifaceted approach to how we push back right now against Trump. We're going to talk about all of that a week from Monday in a webinar. And so I will make sure that we drop the link to that into the comments below this video. I will also make sure we drop the link to register over here. I always do this in reverse. So that you all can register for that if you would care to. And lastly, if you like what we do here, please don't forget to like this, subscribe, make sure you comment after the fact to tell the algorithm you like what we're doing here, and share it with your friends. Because, you know, the more information that we can get out there to people, that's not just truthful information, which, by the way, is doing a service for the community that you live in. You should share truthful information. It's also really important for people to hear how they can make a difference and what hope looks like in this era. So lots of love to all of you. I will catch you all here tomorrow, regular time. I will also be here regular time on Friday for our Patreon subscribers. There will be a bonus broadcast on Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock. That will be Progressive Coffee Hour. And I will catch you all here right back here, same time, same place tomorrow. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.